Welcome to Access Your Leadership, where we share inspiring career stories and talk about ways you can level up your own leadership potential. I'm your host and coach, Hakim, and today I'm here with Russ Katzman. Russ is a strategist, coach, mentor, author, and international speaker, and the founder and CEO of Progeny Coaching and Consulting LLC, where they focus on small business entrepreneurs and executives in a variety of industries to address any and all headaches they experience leading themselves and their businesses. Russ, so nice to have you here.
Thanks, Hakeem. Appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. Before we get into the meat of it, I'd love to hear from you. What's a leadership win that you want to share, either personal or professional, either of yourself, of others? What do you got for us?
Yeah, leadership wins. I mean, it's fun to kind of think about those, especially after the fact. I had a client a couple weeks ago. I was up at his place in the Midwest, runs a large construction company there. And you know this as a coach. I mean, there's times when you say something to somebody and you see the light bulb go on, or you see it kind of register with them. It's like, yeah, that feels good. And I had one for a guy. He's doing really, really well. He's got two people that are kind of his VPs in command, one on the operations side, one in finance. They're allowing him to kind of back out of the business a little bit. So I'm trying to get him through that process, because when you're a leader that tends to be very directive, getting you out of that process is a tough one for you. And so we've been doing really well with that in the last couple of months. In fact, I met with his people and they said, yeah, keep going, get him out. You know, we're doing really well. We love what we're doing in the business. We want him out of our stuff. And so for him, it's finding that next chapter. And so as we talk about what leadership looks like for him going forward, you know, for him, I'd love to be able to teach that next generation. He says his purpose, and he's a mid-50s guy, but he's looking at the next handful of years. He said, I'd love to be able to take 20% of my time and teach that next generation. Okay, great. Let's figure out how to get you there. Then he turns around and he starts talking about these investments and people calling him about, oh, hey, I've got this building downtown. You could refurbish it, et cetera, et cetera. You could do something along the lines of building a construction company down there, or maybe we build that into a restaurant or a bar, and yet all these different types of dreams and ideas he could do with it. And I said to him, what would it be like if you took that same amount of money? And it wasn't a huge amount of money. There's a couple different initiatives, probably 200,000-300,000 in general. I said, what would it look like if you took that same money and put it back into your business? Does that get you closer or further away from that 20 or 25% of your time? And he honestly, Hakeem, the look on his face, he just kind of sat back. Like, huh, you know what? I hadn't thought about that. Man, I could do, and then he starts rattling the stuff off, right? I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, and that would get us to here. And then I'd be able to take that chunk of my time, and all of a sudden you had somebody connected to their purpose, right? And as a leader, I think that's one of the things we really have to do, for whether they're the lowest person in the organization or somebody that's right beside us or even above us. It is help them fulfill their purpose, because that's where people truly find satisfaction in what they do. So that was a great opportunity for me, and a great story for me to tell.
Yeah, I love that story, and I'm picturing it. You know, there's sort of the visual I have is like peeling back the fingers of a leader off of their business and be like, just let go. But then
Yeah.
also realizing that so many leaders, especially when they're running their own business and they've built it to a certain level, start to feel like, well, I either can't let go, or if I'm going to let go, if I let go, I'm just going to be sort of like flailing and lost in space. And
Yep.
what do I want to do with my time, my resources, my knowledge, my experiences? And the word that came to mind, which you ended up just nailing, was purpose. And to be connected to that purpose is one thing, but to have the conversations that allow you to get clear on what that purpose actually even
Mm-hmm.
is so valuable, because then all of a sudden it just grounds you. And I can imagine just watching his shoulders relax and him
Yeah.
think, wow, you know, I was getting a little overwhelmed. I was overwhelming myself with all of what I should do or could do, when the reality is I could just reinvest this back in my business, which is in service of what I'm trying to do, which is remove myself from the business. And then things get a lot more clear.
Yeah, and I think that the thing you touch on there is with that purpose. I think especially with entrepreneurs or high-level executives, what they do is they start to define themselves by their business, right? Is the business doing well? I'm doing well because my business is doing well, or I keep struggling because my business is struggling. Instead of defining a purpose and using the business as a component to fulfill that purpose. But that doesn't mean that if the business goes away and somebody else is running the business, that I'm no longer in pursuit of that purpose. I can still fulfill that purpose in other ways and have that business be successful on its own. And yet I'm still fulfilling my purpose in other ways as well.
Yeah.
And drawing that distinction for them, and to your point, kind of peeling back those fingers from the business helps them let go of that identity and find their identity in the pursuit of a purpose instead.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I feel like we could do a whole episode just
Yeah,
on
good.
identity wrapped up in our businesses and who we are as leaders and professionals, and how that ultimately doesn't serve what we're trying to create for the future because it's often misaligned,
Yeah.
or it just hasn't even been looked at. I mean, it's not that it's intentionally misaligned, but there's probably just haven't sat down and actually had the conversations or put the work in to make sure it is congruent, that it is aligned
Mhm.
with what our purpose is. And then all of a sudden you feel that sense of, okay, I feel relief. I feel a deeper connection to what I'm doing, even if I'm not hands in the business anymore.
Tell you, when somebody finds their purpose and they're in pursuit of their purpose, I mean, you're probably feeling this now yourself. I mean,
Yeah.
and I tell this to people all the time. If you would do what you're doing for free, you're probably in the right place. And that's when they find their purpose, you can just see it in them. They want to talk about it. They feel the passion for driving forward what they're doing. Not that, yes, money comes along the way, but it's not in pursuit of the money. It's in pursuit of the purpose.
Yeah.
And you can just see it in people when they get there.
Yeah. I'm smiling because I'm thinking back to the early days where I was doing this for free and
Yeah.
how much I loved it. And then when I decided that the career that I had, which was going very well and I enjoyed very much, had a lot of success, that I was going to shift that to starting my own practice. I remember that it was like a click, it was like,
Yeah.
when you're working on a combination, you get that last number and it's like up and pop. It
Yeah.
just opened up so much because you realize, wow, now I'm about to pursue a career, a professional endeavor that's going to provide for myself and my family that is aligned also with my purpose. I love that.
Yeah.
So, speaking of purpose and where you are now in the world and where you are in your life and your business, tell us a little bit about who Russ is, what you've experienced, where you're from, what's gotten you to where you are today.
Sure. Sure. Now, I grew up in rural Wisconsin. I was that kid that I loved numbers. And so my parents would hand me a book when we go to a restaurant or something. This was, many years ago, as the gray beard tells you. But yeah, many years ago when these little books of, word puzzles and number puzzles and all that kind of stuff. I didn't do the word puzzles. I did all the number puzzles. And I'd sit there and quietly go through it while, they're doing what they're doing. We're eating in a restaurant or whatever. And I just love numbers, just loved them. And so I got into college and got into business. And I thought, well, where do you business but in accounting? Right. So I graduated my undergrad in accounting, went to work for a small regional accounting firm. And, those moments in your life that kind of steer you one way or another. I remember reading an article, and it might have even been a blurb. I don't even remember exactly where it was, but I remember sitting in my apartment reading this article. And it said, what do you want to be in 5 years? Where are you going to be in 5 years? Uh, and I started thinking about it. And it went a little bit further. It said, look at those people that are 5 years forward for where you are right now. They've been in your business 5 years more. Is that what you want to do? And I was at that staff accountant level and I was looking at the seniors and they were doing just a higher level of the same ticking and tying stuff that I was doing. And I said, I really don't. And it wasn't until later that I realized I don't think like an accountant thinks. I understand accounting inside out. Still to this day, I love numbers. It's one of the first things I love to get into with my business owners. But I didn't think like an accountant does. Typical accountants tend to stack things on top of each other to get to the story. Um, I wanted the story first. I want to know why we're doing something, where we're going, what are we trying to do, who's going to go with us, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'll ask the details to back that up. So I got out of accounting. This was late 90s, got out of accounting, moved into where? IT. Late 90s, everybody was in IT, right? So I get into IT. Fortunately, they sent me away to an 8-week training course, got some certifications, et cetera. Came back and started working the help desk. And I pictured, now this one I can picture in my mind. Old school accounting firm, conference room, what's on the shelves. It's all these dusty books and all that kind of stuff. And had accountants on one side of the table and IT guys on the other. Probably, I would say early 1998, maybe middle of 1998. And on the IT side, we had put in a brand new folder system in Novell at the time. We had NT Exchange for mail and Novell for our folder system. And we designed a new one. It was beautiful. It had years, and then under the years were this and et cetera, right? Broke things down. And they're explaining it to the accountants, and the accountants on the other side are like, well, we have tax season coming up around the corner. How are we going to get to this client's folder? Well, you just drill down here and drill down here and drill down here and drill down here. Yeah, but I have that folder sitting on my desktop. Why would I want to go through all? And they're kind of talking past each other. And what I realized was that I was the only person in the room who understood the languages of both sides of the table. Huh, that's an interesting niche. I wonder what it'd be like to do that for any part of the business. Mm-hmm. And so it began. And for the next 15 years, give or take, I spent all sorts of time. I used ERP as a conduit because ERP blends that accounting and IT side, mm-hmm. right? But I took on any role I could, right? Managing projects in, HR, IT, finance, accounting, treasury, logistics, operations, et cetera, sales, marketing, any part of the business I could get into, I did. Any size business, any type of industry I could get into, I did. All as a matter of trying to just build myself to have this education in any part of the business, be able to talk to any part of the business, understand the incentives and what drives any part of the business. And so I did. I worked for companies as large as Pfizer, left Pfizer and went to a startup. Went from the startup to a energy company that's now part of GE. Went from that energy company to a government contractor, right? All these different changes in different industries and different needs and roles. What I didn't realize was I was making myself into a business coach, right? I was gradually moving up the ladder, up towards the C-suite. Went to work for a company here in Tampa. Now I'm in Tampa, Florida. Went to work for a company here in Tampa that is a global service provider, and progressed through and got to the point where I was working the C-suite with them. But at the same time, I was doing some stuff on the side. You talk about doing stuff for free. There's some companies that I was consulting with and coaching on the side because you have that outside perspective.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, even with that global service provider, when I was hired on full time, the CTO sat with me. He said, I appreciate you coming in from the outside. We're going to, hire you, but I want you to retain that view. I don't want you to lose that outside perspective. And it was mainly because that's what they needed. They needed somebody from the outside because it's a family-owned business, been around for 40 years, 60,000 employees, $2 billion organization, huge, right? But they needed that outside perspective to kind of challenge some things, to question the status quo. Same thing I was doing for some small businesses on the side, people I knew that gave me an opportunity to start some of that coaching practice. And then you get into 2020 when a lot of people reevaluated where they were. 2020, 2021, that business, that global service provider got sold. The acquiring organization came in, kind of stripped the topsoil from the organization. And fortunately, I had the coaching to fall back on. Yeah. And so I started going in full time. Wow. And, it's been quite the journey. I switched from larger organizations to focus primarily on smaller, pre-revenue startups all the way to $100, $200 million organizations. They're much more dynamic than the large organization. Mm-hmm. You get to a global service provider like that, and you tend to have the same conversations year after year. You're talking about competition, you're talking about the market, you're talking about where we're going, what we're doing, how we're going to get there, et cetera. You sit in the C-suite, sometimes just a single person of a smaller organization, and you talk to them this week. Things are going to change from this week to next week. This week, it's a major vendor that they're having issues with. Next week, it's a customer issue. The following week, it's an employee issue. The next week, hey, maybe we get to talk about strategy for a little bit. Oh, nope, strategies just got interrupted because I got a phone call for blah, 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 right? So much more dynamic and so much more exciting to work with those small guys.
Yeah.
So I got to where I am.
Well, and I love the fact that you recognize so early on that this, or maybe not despite, but because of your love of numbers, you had the opportunity to pursue that particular path, and you saw the opportunity to continue doing what you love, but in a different capacity, and use that to your benefit, use that strength, use that passion, and serve others in a different way than simply being an accountant, and not to minimize being an accountant. I mean, I think it's really important that you were able to see that there was a disconnect clearly between the way in which departments or business units within an organization were
Right.
communicating, and you could actually say, hey, this is an area where I excel, and I also enjoy both sides of this business. And what might it look like if I were doing this, like you said, in other industries, other parts of the business? What about that was compelling enough for you to decide to then break away and start educating yourself, start challenging yourself, start working for these other organizations, and then just start acquiring all this knowledge?
I think it was just a general thirst for learning, right?
Mm,
I've always been one to learn and acquire more knowledge. Even now, one of the favorite things I do with coaching people is recommending books or videos I see online, TED Talks, all that kind of stuff, because there's so much out there, and I'm sure you see this on leadership side as well. There's just so much out there that people can get overwhelmed in trying to figure out, do I listen to a Hormozy, or do I go listen to what Russell Brunson's saying about funnels, or whoever those guys that are out there that are quote unquote most popular right now. Those are the voices people tend to listen to, but there's so much more, right? You go back to a Chet Holmes on sales. Well, that's 20 years old already, but the concepts that he talks about are still really valuable to somebody creating a business now. And so having the ability to bring that knowledge to somebody and to kind of narrow it for them and say, what, here's what I think is great for your situation. It's that thirst for knowledge that I always had and continue to have, I think is always going to propel me to continue to learn stuff.
yeah, I think lifelong learning is a crucial skill of any leader, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, born and raised in Wisconsin,
Yep.
and then through all of these opportunities that you created for yourself and sort of maximized, were you
Sure.
traveling? Were you seeing different parts of the country? Like, how were you handling just, I mean, I think one of the things that people struggle with is this positioning of comfort that we sometimes find ourselves in at certain parts of our lives, where we feel
Mhm.
like, okay, maybe this isn't the ultimate career path for me, but I'm comfortable where I am. I'm going to stay where I am, either geographically or professionally.
Yeah.
Let's just ride this out for a little bit. Let's just see what goes. What sort of self-talk were you practicing as you were bouncing from opportunity to opportunity or location to location that allowed that to be successful for you?
Um, yeah, it's interesting. I think people have to give themselves permission to evolve.
Mm,
I think sometimes we're afraid to evolve, or we're concerned that if we try something new, or if we go someplace different, that we're going to become somebody different.
mhm.
Uh, and I think we have to give ourselves permission to evolve as an individual, as a person, as a husband, a father, as a leader in the organization, as an entrepreneur, as an executive. For me, as I looked at where I was in Wisconsin, I wanted my undergrad work was so focused on accounting. Now that I wanted a broad view of the organization, I wanted to get my master's, but in a broad view, right? A very less strategic focused master's. And I found one at the University of Tennessee. I had driven my brother, my oldest brother lived in Savannah at the time. And so I had driven down to his place a couple times. And the one year I took I think it was 98 actually, that I took off after tax season. I jumped from university to university, checking out all these different places on the east, virtually everything east of the Mississippi that I could get to. And I looked at Tennessee or Built, North Carolina, Indiana. There were a couple others I applied to, but they were all strategic focused MBAs. And so that's what I was looking at the time. Ultimately, I went to Tennessee in 99, and that took me away from Wisconsin, took me away from the family for the first time. Everybody, I'm last of six brothers and sisters. And
Mm,
so all of us were around there except for my oldest brother, because he had been in the Air Force and traveled all over. But it allowed me this opportunity to get out of that quote unquote bubble, right, that you're talking about, and you're kind of living in, and get away from the safety of that. And all of a sudden you realize how big the world is, right? And
yeah.
how different it can be and how different people can be, right? And so I spent 12 years in Tennessee, ultimately met my wife there. We lived from Knoxville to Memphis, back to Knoxville. Then we moved to Tampa here in 2011. I've got, with the opportunities I had over the years, I traveled through all sorts of different countries, and a bunch of in Europe and Asia and here. It's such a privilege to be able to see the other parts of the world. And to do so, I taught change management around the globe. So many people don't understand how to manage change in their own organizations.
Yeah.
And so I had an opportunity to speak in various countries around the globe, teaching that, mentoring people in that realm. So The opportunity it presents me now as I'm building my organization is, and of course, COVID and teleconferences evolved into video conferences, evolved into Zoom calls all the time. So I can now coach people. I've got people in 16 different states and 5 countries and on 3 continents right now, which is something that would have been unheard of 10, 15 years ago. But
Yeah.
I love it. It's such a great opportunity to be able to impact businesses around the globe with the lessons that we learn along the way. So I think to your point, it's important to find your way outside that bubble and to allow yourself to evolve.
Yeah. I think that is such an important message. And we're talking about in the context of, traveling, looking at opportunities, but even as an individual, and I know that you're implying that as well. But the takeaway for me is I'm hearing that permission to allow ourselves to evolve is so important, because if you think about, I mean, I have had clients literally say to me, I'm not sure how far I want to go with this coaching because I'm not sure
Mm.
how I'm going to be received by those people who know me to be this way that I am now.
Yeah.
I was like, can you say that again, please? And listen to yourself say what you just said. And it comes from just sort of a conditioning, a pattern, a habit, a
Yep.
comfort that we create around this version of ourselves that served us well, likely for a very long time. And again, we can get real deep with it and talk about how these were things that served us when we were children, but
Sure.
not even as far back as being kids, but really thinking about the way that I was as a professional in my early years of my career is not who I am today. It served me incredibly well in those first 5 to 7 years. And then there was a different version of me that I needed to be as a leader of organizations domestically, internationally. And
Yep.
then another version of me as a husband and a father and as a business owner. So, I mean, we're constantly evolving. And the permission piece, I think, is such an important word that you used, because if we see this as just part of the journey, we're always evolving. There's always opportunity for growth, for expansion,
Yep.
for greater awareness. Then we don't feel this is something that we're constantly coming into conflict with. And we see opportunities for our business to evolve, for our services, our products, ourselves as
Yep.
leaders, our roles to evolve. And that's okay, versus it always being something that we're scrutinizing and skeptical of.
And I'll tell you, people look at, um, there's the old adage of looking at the silver lining and all that kind of stuff. But people look at career setbacks, quote unquote, as setbacks, and I have to start over. They get let go, laid off from a certain organization, and they do this kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter is, if you change that and look at it as an opportunity to evolve, an opportunity to control your destiny by, okay, I've been laid off from here. Well, what do I really want to do now? And take an opportunity to shape that future instead of, letting it be seen as a setback.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, that's when I started that coaching on the side, right? I was working for that government contractor. They made some mistakes in the leadership team and lost a chunk of their revenue. They had to let go of a bunch of strategic individuals, including myself. And for me, the first thing I did was pick up the phone and call the vendors that I had been working with from a financial system standpoint and say, hey, you need anybody? Can I consult you for a while I'm looking for something full time? And I did. And I realized that coaching role that I was doing for them, something I really enjoyed. And that's probably the first time when I realized that all this, all this education I had been giving myself over the years was leading me to do that. Right. I don't think I truly understood it before that. And I kind of did it on the side, but man, I really enjoyed it. And allowing yourself to take what was a setback and use it as an opportunity can put you in a place where you're meant to be, as opposed to where you're trying to force yourself to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So well said. I think that's exactly right. I mean, you said silver lining, then there's the whole, the commonly used expression, this is happening for a reason. And I've liked
Mhm.
swapping that out with Ryan Holiday. Thank you very much. Obstacle is the way.
Yeah.
Because for me, if you think about all of these things that we're experiencing in our lives, in our business, in our relationships, whatever it might be, they are showing us the way in
Yeah.
one way or another. And how we choose to tell ourselves the story about what that obstacle, quote unquote, obstacle is, will shape what decision we ultimately make about that circumstance that we
Yep.
find ourselves in. And did you find that you had a particular reaction to the sort of the downsizing that you were referring to? I mean, initially, was there like an initial reaction to that before you saw the way, we'll say, and then
Yeah.
decided to go into coaching full time?
It's funny, and everybody's initial reaction is kind of, the same thing when you get in. Okay, so where do I go now? Right? Where
Mm,
do I start? And the initial impulse, and the thing is, I could see it coming, right? I was in the position in the organization where I was working with the CFO. I knew what had happened. I knew what it was going to happen to the numbers. I knew that they weren't going to be in a position to take this company that they had grown over the past couple of years and maintain that level. Right. So I knew it was probably coming, but you still, once it's done, you still have that same reaction, that visceral reaction of, okay, I've got 2 weeks before that last paycheck comes to try and find the next paycheck. Right. And so you bury yourself in it to try to, you start making phone calls, you start, doing this. You have to replace your cell phone, because I had a company cell phone at the time, which was my initial introduction into the fact that I should never have my personal and my work phone be the same one.
yeah.
Right. So for a long time, I carried two cell phones until I finally came off and did this. But you really want to fill that void. You want to know where that next paycheck's going to come from, especially when you're the primary income for the household. And so you really push for that. And what I didn't do, and my son was probably 4.5, 5 at the time, maybe 5.5. What I didn't do is take the step back and say, you know what? I have an opportunity here to take a couple weeks and just enjoy my family and just spend some time taking him to school. Or, it was, late in the semester, and it kind of carried into the summer, and, take advantage of it, and take him for some walks, go to the zoo a couple times. I didn't take that opportunity to do that. And I really kind of wished I had,
Mm,
and every once in a while I'll see somebody who's been laid off or something, and I'll tell them, look, I know you want to get out there and drive for that next opportunity,
yeah.
but take some days, right? Take a week, enjoy what you have, spend some family time, and then hit it hard,
Yeah.
right? Make some phone calls. Those opportunities that'll be there today, most likely you'll still be there in a week. You might lose one or two, but then a couple other ones will come open. So don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Go out, enjoy it, spend some time for yourself, and then get back at it. So that was kind of my reaction to the point.
Yeah. I think that's such a natural reaction to have. And I think we're all conditioned to this. And I don't think it's even generational per se. I
Nope.
think we all just imagine. I mean, even when I made the choice to go into business, the idea was, okay, if I'm going to launch this business and I'm going to build this business, I've got to work 23 and a half hours every day. I'll sleep half an hour and then I'll get up and I'll do it all over again. I was like, what? Wait. Very quickly, I realized, one, that's not why I'm pursuing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Two, it's not sustainable. And the reality is, what you're also talking about too, in taking advantage of that gift of time, as it were,
Hmm.
is what will open up for you during that time. Maybe you're out on a walk with your kid and you're reflecting as you watch them play and throw rocks in the lake or do what, and something comes to you that you wouldn't have maybe discovered or uncovered as you were frantically going through and sending, these connection emails and applying to jobs or whatever it might be. And we all do that. And what I have found from my own personal experiences, to take myself out of that very traditional, very conditioned, very natural initial response,
Sure.
and take that time to reflect, take that time to really utilize the time. It's always served me, and it never has not served me well. So I think that's a great takeaway. And when you talk about seeing the writing on the wall, I remember the employer that I had been employed by, the place where I had worked prior to starting the business, the woman who had hired me retired 4 months after bringing me on. So I was in a leadership role, and it started this chain reaction, this carousel of this leadership coming in and out, administration
Yeah.
coming in and out. And I had 5 different supervisors, 7 different titles, sort of steadily rising in the ranks. So, constantly moving forward in generally positive direction, but it gave me the time to do what you just suggested, which I think is so valuable, to try and slow this down, because I felt this coming. I knew that there was something happening here, and I had to decide whether or not it was going to be, do I just jump into something new because I need to get something, Or do I really want to sit and take this time as an opportunity to reflect on what am I deeply passionate about? What is my purpose? What is going to get me up in the morning excited every single day? And I know it
Yep.
sounds pie in the sky and a little Pollyannish, but the reality is if you blink, 10 years are going to go by, 15 years are going to go by, and you're going to be
Yep.
stuck in this same job or in this same leadership style or with this same team or in the same location when you realize that this is all a matter of perspective. It's all a matter of choice. So I love that you shared that.
Well, I think it's interesting because if you flip that on its head and talk to it from the leader's perspective, right? And you say, look, when there's something happening, communicate what you know, right? There's an individual from Canada, I think he is, who is kind of when you have companies that have tough situations and they need that PR help, right? He kind of sits in that space, it's kind of that PR help they have. And what he talks about is he says, say what you know, say what you don't know, and tell them when they can come back for more information. And so many leaders, so many companies forget about that. And they say, well, I don't have the whole story, so I'm just going to hold back.
Mm.
What they miss is exactly what you're saying is people are going to see the writing on the wall. And I always tell people it's not the dumb mice that jump off the ship first. You're going to lose some of your best employees because they're going to see the writing on the wall. And they're going to say, you know what? I'm going to do a little self-assessment. I'm going to take a moment and pause and say, if this is something that's coming down the pike, where do I want to go next? And they're going to start to take steps towards that. And you may lose them before you have an opportunity to try to keep them. And so that writing on the wall and that in between kind of do we, don't we dance that people tend to do with these
Mm-hmm.
major changes in companies is an important one for people to consider.
Yeah. I work with a company out of the UK called the Training Rock, fantastic leadership training company. And one of the concepts we talk about, and I'm usually talking about this in the context of, leader communicating to their small team or an individual one-on-one. But what you're just describing is a communication vacuum. And the communication vacuum is where the conversation doesn't occur. And the conversation is the things you said, what you know, what you don't know, and when they can come back to you for more.
Yep.
And that communication vacuum, when there's that void of information sharing that should be happening and it's not happening,
Yep.
it leaves all kinds of room for everybody's storytelling to come into play. And we talk about this as, sort of one-on-one, and I know you're familiar with this too, but you can imagine a leader who could communicate something more clearly, more effectively, more concisely, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
limited to an individual, so that it gives them an anchor, something to hold
Right.
on to, something for them to explore, something for them to base a story around, an actual fact, versus there being no information being
Oh,
shared
yeah.
and everyone just coming up with their own story.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good
So
point.
I want to shift a little bit to you mentioned leadership, and it was a great segue to what you do in your business and how you find leadership coming into play from leading oneself and leading others to improve the outputs and results of a business more generally.
Yeah. So the one thing I have that I utilize through my coaching, then all of that background, all of those different parts of the organization allows me to talk to a leader about any part of the organization. That said, the principles that I work with them from a business standpoint are not that difficult, right? We'll do a lot of stuff through a business model canvas because I think it's a nice, neat one-page way of seeing everything in the business. And quite honestly, no matter your industry or your stage in the business life, it all kind of comes back to who am I serving? What are their needs? What do I have to offer those individuals that nobody else can? How do I communicate to them? Channels, the relationships, the revenue streams. How do I make it happen? Who are the people? What are the activities? Who are the partners that help us make it happen? If the cost is less than the revenues, I have a business. Everything boils down to that. Even
Yeah.
our marketing, people say, well, there's no marketing there. Yes, there is. I know what my customers needed is. I know what the value proposition is. You create marketing that ties the value proposition to their need, and you've got a customer,
Yeah.
right? That's all there is to it. And so, from a leadership standpoint, it doesn't matter if they've got one employee as a solopreneur or if they've got 100. We talk them through the various challenges, headaches, that kind of stuff that are going on. And most often, especially early on for the small guys, it's some component of that business model canvas that's out of whack. They don't
Mhm.
understand their customer well. Or they start with their value proposition. So many people, because it's the center of the BMC, a lot of times people start with, well, this is what I do well, so I'm going to go sell it. Okay, great. Let's not build a mousetrap for the land of snakes. Let's make sure that somebody's going to buy it if you're going to sell it. The only way to do that is to understand your customer intimately. I work with people and try to get them to get inside the head of their customer, consumer, client, whatever you want to call it. Get inside their head with multiple characteristics, 30, 50, 70 characteristics. I want you to be able to picture that avatar and understand what their needs are so that you can design a value proposition that meets that. That's the leadership in that solopreneur scenario. In the executive scenario, when I'm working with executives or even teams of executives, it's understanding how to help the rest of my business do exactly that same thing, right? Do my employees understand that consumer or the client or customer? Do my employees understand how marketing ties to the needs of the customer? They understand the true value that we bring to the table and why we're different than the other guys in the market, right? A lot of times executives, as they sit at the higher levels of the organization, haven't communicated some of that to the organization or made sure that everybody in the organization understands that top to bottom. And so their leadership doesn't produce the results that they want. And it's not because they don't have the right people. A lot of the times it just boils down to the communication of who we are, what's our brand identity, what do we deliver, how are we going to get there, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And communication is such a huge piece of that. And I imagine that the way in which, and I'm sure you see this as well, and I work with leaders most often one-on-one. And when we're talking about communication as one element of what we're talking about and working through in our coaching, we find that underneath communication, then there are the layers. Why do you communicate a certain way? Why are you hesitating to communicate this or that? Just back to your earlier point, when there's maybe more challenging information to relay to individuals, whether it's feedback, whether it's an update on the company status, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
what do you find is an individual struggle of leaders that you're working with when they are trying to implement what you're advising them to implement?
One of the first things I qualify people for when we're trying to work together is coachability.
Mm.
Right? I won't work with somebody if they aren't coachable. There was one distinct individual I worked with once, kind of the exception to the rule, that for whatever reason, in a weak moment, if you will, we started working together, and I knew it from the start it probably wasn't going to work. What he wanted was a yes man, right? He wanted somebody who would agree with where he's going, right? And I always say, I've never been a cheerleader. I'm very direct in my feedback. I will pat you on the back, and then we're going to get back to work, right? Because the good thing about hitting milestones in a business is it now sets a new floor. So we know what we can achieve. Well, why would we settle for anything less? Let's keep going. Let's keep driving. So from my perspective, if I'm working with a leader, whether they're an entrepreneur or an executive, you've got to be coachable. You've got to be adaptable. And it's funny because I had a conversation with a client a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about being in this mastermind group with organizations that were much larger than him. And yet the way he approaches things and sees things are quite a bit different than the way they do. And we were talking about his ability to kind of take a handful of those individuals and kind of coach them, help them, because they approached him after the mastermind group and said, hey, yeah, I like what you did. I'd love to be able to do that. And he said to me, he said, why would they want me to teach them? He said, I'm so much smaller than they are, right? Et cetera. And I said to him, I said, question for you. How much money do I make? I don't know. I said, did you ever ask? No. Yet you work with me as your coach. Well, yeah. I said, it doesn't matter, right? If you have something to offer to them that you can coach them and help them through their leadership struggles, help them, right? They don't care what you make relative to them.
Yeah.
All they care is that you have a new idea that can take them to some place that they're not right now. And that to me is coachability, is recognizing in somebody else that they've got something to offer that you don't have yourself. It's that outside perspective. It's that different bit of experience, something that you can bring to the table, or as the coach, something that they can bring to the table for you that you just didn't have before.
Yeah. I think that goes back to, I completely agree. And I'm thinking back to my own experience of that one client that I had that I kind of knew very early on. I don't know if this is going to be a very coachable client. And sure enough, they weren't. And I think it goes back to when I'm hearing you talk about coachability, this awareness around how necessary that permission for evolution is.
Probably, yeah.
I think there's, and again, I mean, I think the struggle that I sometimes find is wanting to get past that. And sometimes I can, sometimes we can with these, we'll call them, not so coachable potential clients,
Sure.
because there's someone who's resistant to it, but they know that there's something there and they want to get to the other side of it. And if they're open to the conversation, sometimes you can get past that. And then all of a sudden they realize, actually, I am coachable, or I have just given myself permission, or even if they've interpreted our conversation as us giving permission for them to
Yep.
evolve, then they move into that space of being much more coachable. But I think it's this, I just love this as a concept. Leaders seeing their journey as one where consistently along the way, they have to be giving themselves permission to evolve.
Yeah.
And the same is true for their business. I mean, the Jim Collins book, Good to Great,
Yep.
which is another great book about
Another great
how
book.
good businesses have evolved into being great when they were, it's the Walgreens and some of these very iconic brands that we know and we see on every corner. They were what they were very early on and had to evolve. And when they found themselves resisting, they had to ask the question, why? And
Yep.
then once they gave themselves permission to evolve, they actually continued to thrive and then grow to be these great organizations and institutions that we know them to be. But the same is true about individuals. So I love that you're doing that.
Well, and that's what, and I teach this with my change management. It's what a lot of people forget is, they see organizations as entities in and of themselves, but all they are is an aggregation of people, right? For an organization to evolve, you need the people within it to evolve. And so good to great happens because the leaders in that organization recognize that they're not where they want to be and they evolve themselves, thereby bringing the organization along as well.
Yeah. That's a huge takeaway. Anyone who's listening and you're thinking, if you find yourself saying all the time, they just won't listen or they won't do what I'm telling them to do or whatever it might be, look within. Look within, give yourself permission to try a different approach, give yourself permission to evolve and to put in the work and put in the research and put in the time to find a new approach or see things from a different perspective. You'll see that people around you start to as well.
Yep.
Well, I love this. I'm so fascinated by the fact that the work that you're doing with these individuals, internationally, domestically, you have this opportunity to work with the leader on their leadership of themselves and of their teams in service of them building out their business more broadly.
Right.
So anyone who's listening, what would you recommend as a skill or as a leadership characteristic for them to focus on if they're looking to improve their leadership?
That's funny. You just touched on it, right? And that's that adaptability, right?
Mhm.
So I had gosh, this is going back to my college days, my undergrad college days. I was running a game room and snack bar with the university's money. Basically, you're running your own business with somebody else's money. It was awesome. I loved it. And it was pool hall and nachos and pizza behind the counter. I mean, it's ideal for especially for a college kid and in business. I mean, it was ideal for me. And I had a supervisor there. And his approach to leadership was he would adapt himself to whatever you needed, right? Some person needs somebody very hands-on, somebody else needs somebody hands-off, et cetera. He would adapt. And I remember asking him one time because he was really on somebody, kind of guiding them and spending a lot of time with them in the organization. And then said to him, I said, kind of feel left out. You haven't been spending much time. He says, you don't need that. He says, that's not the type of leadership you need. Says I adapt myself to whatever you do. And I kind of, young as I was, I kind of thought to myself, that's a lot of work, right? Changing yourself for everything. And I had probably 15 or 20 employees in the game room and snack bar. And I didn't. I had a singular leadership style, right? It was pretty directive, and mainly because that particular quote unquote business had never turned a profit. And so I was determined to turn a profit. And I did my first semester. But I'll tell you, I never endeared the employees to me. Right. Over the year and a half that I had it. Yeah, they liked working with me. They talked to me and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think they ever bought into a vision. It was always a job for them. And so later on, as I led teams and various teams and stuff over the years, I had this echo of what that supervisor did in my head. and I learned to adapt my style. And now I actually wrote a book called Chameleon Leadership, which the idea behind it is exactly that is, yes, it's a lot of info on small businesses and what you need to build a small business out. But it's also got this underpinning of you need to adapt your style without adapting your values. Adapt your style to certain situations. And I think that's the key to it is, as a leader, if you can learn to adapt your approach to the people that you're leading, because your team will bring a little bit of everything to you, because you don't want a bunch of homogeneous people on the team, or you're only going to be very narrow in what you can achieve.
Yeah.
You want a nice heterogeneous mix of a bunch of different people that bring different things to you. So they're going to need different things from you as a leader. If you can adapt your style and yet still carry the same values in everything you do, I think that's huge for anybody to learn as a leader.
Yeah, it's a great one. And I like the fact that you really emphasize adapt your style while also maintaining your value and authenticity. Because I think that's a real piece that some leaders struggle with, which is this choosing who they're going to be each day. What leader am I going to be today? It's not who are you today. You are you every day, but your style. And I did for the University of Miami once, I did an essentials of leadership training. And one of the slides was, here are the, I think it was like 12 or 14 different leadership styles. And we went through them and explained them. And at the end, I asked everyone, so which one do you think is the best? Trick question. Which one do you think is the best? And everyone's raising their hand. They're putting it in the chat. I think this one, I think that one. And I said, well, you're all wrong, because they're all necessary. They're all absolutely necessary in your leadership style. And the most effective leaders are the ones who can toggle between those as needed. Like you were saying, adapt that style. And it makes me think of also the age-old expression of treat others the way you want to be treated. And I've started to shift that, which is treat others the way they want to be treated. Because if you think about even leadership in the context of feedback, a leader's giving feedback the way they want to receive feedback. Are you sure the person that you're talking to wants to receive feedback that same way? So rather than treating other people the way they want to be treated, treat other people the way they want to be treated.
Right. I like that.
Yeah. I want to give you a chance to tell the listeners where they can find more about you and the work you're doing and Progeny, and I'll include some of that in the show notes as well. But please tell us where we can get in touch with you.
Sure. No, I'll let you spell this out in the show notes, but I've got a link tree out there that'll take you any place you want to go for me. So we'll get that in the notes. But Progeny CC, that's Progeny CC, as in coachingconsulting.com. That's the main website that'll get you anywhere you need to be. You can find me on LinkedIn. Happy for any and all connections that pop in my way. Just tell me you found me with this Hakim discussion, and I'll be happy to link up with you and have a conversation.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I have enjoyed this conversation. It could easily go on for another half an hour or an hour,
we could talk.
in various different directions. But Russ, thank you for taking the time, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Hakim. Appreciate it.
As always, I'd love to hear from you about the episode. What came up for you as you think about leveling up your leadership game? And please, if you enjoyed the episode, I encourage you to like and subscribe. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Hakim A. Lokhtar or at lokhtarcoaching.com. Thanks for tuning in. Keep being great, and we'll see you next time.